Today is November 15th, 1974, and I'm interviewing Rabbi Oscar Lipshutz in Chicago.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. The first question that I wanted to ask you was, when did you first encounter the survivors of the Holocaust?
Survivors?
Survivors of the Holocaust. And when was that, and where was that?
In the fall of 1945. And the first ones I met were in the Le Havre area of France. The first group of children were in the Le Havre area, where as a chaplain I opened up a Hebrew school in a Quonset hut at Fort de Tourneville, which was really the outpost of the Germans overlooking the channel. And this was the first encounter. These were Yiddish-speaking children, spoke some French, but they're all youngsters.
Mm-hmm. Were they in need of food and clothing?
These were children that were remote from sources of help, but whose parents lived in some of the small towns on the coast of France.
They were orphans?
No. These were children of couples who were scattered in the Abbeville area and various other small communities, farm communities, which were inland. A few families lived in the Normandy area right after the war had gone in, because there was a vacuum that enabled them to find some employment, whereas it was impossible to find employment in Paris and in urban areas that were at that time in a rather confused state, a great influx. But these little children were lovable little children that had never seen an American or understood what we were doing. Also, they were not able to receive any kind of relief aid in that area. It hadn't gone that far yet.
Mm-hmm. So you would characterize your activity during that period of time as basically providing education?
As far as refugees,
yeah,
setting up basic religious needs. Supplies were sent to the families, such as candles, which we got from the quartermaster because that was a very dear item at the time. Various PX items which would enable them to have something to live on, and to them was a very rather wonderful gift. Every once in a while, a few cans of food that were surplus or nondescript, in other words, no labels on it, where it couldn't be used as part of a mess operation. They'd be donated by the quartermaster to pass out to any refugees in the area. And this is the way we did it for them. However, we did not conduct religious services for these people. Services they held among themselves, and then some of them were not ritualistically inclined from the standpoint of requiring services.
Were they looking for families as well, or?
At that time, they were looking to be recognized as Jews eligible to receive treatment and to be recognized in terms of resettlement. Mm-hmm. All cases at that time referred to the Jewish community in Paris, where I moved to shortly thereafter for a short stay.
Do you remember exactly when you were in Paris?
Well, I don't recall the exact date, but I met up with Chaplain Herschel Lavazer, mm-hmm. who presently, to the best of my knowledge, lives in Jerusalem.
Yes, I've spoken to him.
You've spoken to
yeah, he's writing a book on his experience.
Now, I was with Hirsch in Paris at the time when the joint started its great shipment of food supplies into the area, and where the Varatzola, which is deserving of a lot of credit, sent over emissaries, and the Varatzola there was interested in reconstituting Jewish life. Packages were sent in, the old double wrap packages. I'm sure that Hirsch will give it to you in detail, or has given.
Well, he's not, he didn't want to speak to me because he's writing his book.
Well, I can't blame him on that account, but we were both stationed for a short while, very short.
So this was in...
Well, we're talking in 46. Now we're going into 46, beginning of 46. We were both in Paris at the Majestic Hotel. I lived at the Hotel Louvois. And the APO, the Army Post Office, tolerated these packages which came in great abundance and through the military postal system.
Now, how did that come about? How did they send it to you?
Well, GIs were recipients of packages from home. This became the custom to send your member of your family or a relative a package with some food or something that he could enjoy. There were commercial outfits that sent things to boys who wanted to order them. This was strictly legal. And there were private people who wanted to send a package in order to help sustain a family. This was a borderline, a cloud case, because it was really intended only for GIs.
Mm-hmm. But you never asked GIs to, or others in America to...
I never sent any letter at any time soliciting any food for people outside of the military. Mm-hmm. The Jewish Welfare Board was instrumental in making sure that we had everything that we requested that was reasonably possible to furnish. Now, if we wanted to share some of that with people, we did, so that at services we shared whatever we had with them in religious supplies and prayer books, in food items, we never kept anything back or stored anything. It was always used. But the Varatzola motivated people to ship things, and either to send it on the address of a GI or to send it to the chaplain section, to the chaplain. And there's nothing in the law that said that the chaplain couldn't receive packages from a lot of well-wishers, like the Women's Division of Jewish Welfare Board sent over a lot of things to help the chaplain's program, the secular and religious program. So, however, it was later discovered that these packages were double wrapped. This caused quite a bit of chagrin to the chaplain, because now this was an abuse, which at first was tolerated, but then they clamped down.
What do you mean double wrapped?
Outside it was addressed to a GI or to the chaplain section, and inside there was a name of a relative, or let's say some acquaintance that they knew, or some name they'd been given, like adopt a family, where they were sending a package to a family to help them out. Mm-hmm. It contained either particularly kosher type items that were unavailable in Europe, or foodstuffs, which normally would be required, basic items that a family would require as staples to their own survival, or to supplement the rations they were receiving from the joint. Of course, at this point, there was a stop made to this type of shipping because it was not proper. As soon as the post office notified the chaplain, we immediately took steps to see to it, to notify the Varatzola that we were not to be used as a vehicle for this kind of shipping. The Army, incidentally, was much more magnificent in its distribution of foods than can ever be imagined. The Army did a great job. It was easy for the Army to take rations that they felt were not usable or simply not serviceable at the time for any reasons, because it didn't fit into the menu, or they were short in an item that was just not good for general distribution, and distributed it. Of course, to a rabbi, there was a problem that the item might not be kosher. And therefore, as a chaplain, I would never distribute an item that wasn't kosher to Jewish people. The item could be given to joint or somebody else. Again, this was sort of looked upon as a charitable or as a goodwill gesture to people, and it was done in small tricklings, never in any vast amount.
Do you want to discuss your work with the Vahatsala?
Well, the Vahatsala did a magnificent job of trying to first of all, to discover what had happened to the Jewish community. When I say Jewish, I'm talking about a traditional religious community, religious life.
They weren't concerned about Klal Yisrael?
Definitely, definitely. But so Klal Yisrael was a matter for the UNRWA, the subsequent UNRWA organization. And so Klal Yisrael was taken care of by all the various organizations, advisor on Jewish affairs, to the military government. Mm-hmm. There were plenty of spokesmen, the highest, the Ort, they took care of Klal Yisrael. Mm-hmm. But they were not pinpointing reconstituting the religious life of our people. Mm-hmm. That was a private affair. They were not going to build you synagogues or make sure you had prayer books. What affair is it of military government? But military government, for instance, as I moved on, did appoint, for instance, me in Vienna. I became the advisor on Jewish affairs to the military government.
When was that?
That was in 1946.
Do you remember?
I joined Mark Clark in Vienna, and at that point...
do you remember when in Vienna?
I got there before Pesach. I got there, I suppose, in February, March. I drove from Vienna, from Paris. And at that time I was instructed that I would be given full military support to channel any supplies which could be obtained through any legal sources to be used for refugees, DPs, persecutees. And of course the Joint was a partner. So that the Joint sent in supplies from North Africa, for instance, for Passover. And military vehicles were used in instances to transport these items. To make sure that they arrived in time, the military gave a place to run the Seder. In other words, requisitioned a facility for the Seder. The military showed up to show its goodwill at the Seder. Army mess sergeants and their crews came down to help support, to cook. I mean, with Jewish people doing the labor, mm-hmm. but supervision and the know-how by military personnel who knew how to set this up and do it right and how to use a facility to get the maximum use. This first Seder was attended by the Russians, the French, the British, the Americans, and it was labeled a Seder for the military. But it was earmarked towards inviting all the possible refugees as guests. So that starting with that Seder, through all the Siddur I had them for over 500 people at a time. And much credit should be given to the military. The military bought supplies, for instance, later on in Denmark, kosher poultry. After all, the military is not involved in right. buying kosher poultry, but this was bought through Army channels. And we were allowed to invite guests. We wanted to pay for them, we could pay for them, so that we followed the rules of the military regarding messing, and made repayment properly through government channels. But of course that payment was nominal compared to what things would cost outside. But above all, it was under control, which is what the military wanted. Now the military indicated that they wanted the chaplain to be involved in setting up synagogues and making sure that the facilities used by refugees were proper and adequate and would be fit. Mm-hmm. You have to realize that there was nothing available after the war, except some barracks. One barrack, for instance, up in Linz that was used by the SS, built by slave labor, which the Jews inherited. The military was kind enough to declare a certain amount of building material surplus so that the refugees themselves, with their know-how, could go in and wire it up and get it all fixed up and be able to use the facility. The military was always sensitive to make sure that Jewish people received a certain amount of human kindness from the army. But they wanted it done in a proper, discreet manner, not clandestine, but always in a manner that could be reported, just as the army does go in to other countries and takes care of children and missions and things of that nature. But it was sensitive to Jewish people, and the phenomena was that here we were dealing with military personnel that in many instances had never lived with a Jew, never understood this kind of a Jew, didn't understand the language of these people. And for the first time saw what the Jew looked like after this great catastrophe. And there was a great amount of empathy, especially the leadership.
Can you...
I have to start looking at the services. Yes, one more. Go ahead.
All right. The question that we stopped off with was with regards to Mark Clark and your activities within Austria. Basically, I'm interested in a picture of what took place during that period of time, and how did you become advisor to Mark Clark?
The establishment of a DP section known as G5 became a very important element in dealing with masses of migrant people. The Jewish section, although not called Jewish section, but the section pertaining to Jewish refugees, persecutees, was handled by committees and also by organizations representing Jewish communities, such as, for instance, the Welt Aguda operating out of London, the Vathatzola operating basically out of New York City, and Hayes, Ort. Each one of them had a contribution to make. This was all coordinated, as far as we were concerned, through the joint, even though they were all, each one had its own autonomous program. But the G5 section wanted somebody that could understand the needs of all of these different organizations. Therefore, I was called in and asked, would I interpret for the military what are the requirements, what are the needs, and to suggest to the military who to accept as a representative and how far we can go within the framework of Army policy without doing something that would not be effective or cause embarrassment by being the wrong approach. For example, religious services in DP camps were considered important. I was given carte blanche, do whatever you have to do. The General Clark and later General Keyes indicated anytime you have to use my plane, go ahead, take care, be available where you have to go. Orders were written without any clearance except that of my chief chaplain and of the general, this time General Hickey, Thomas Hickey, who became a very fine friend. He was of Catholic faith, but anything you have to do if it helps the religious life of Jewish people, please go ahead and do it. So that I was given a room immediately in Salzburg, although I lived in Vienna, so that I could go back and forth through the Russian zone, given all necessary credentials, and then given certain authority to be able to pick up a telephone and call back to headquarters and be able to confront them with certain developing pictures. For instance, there were times when refugees rioted.
Do you have any specific...
Beth Bialik, there was a famous camp called Beth Bialik, they rioted.
When?
I believe it was 1947.
Do you remember the dates?
I don't know the precise date.
Okay,
Beth Bialik.
And you were involved in that?
I was involved as to translate what were the needs, and in order to bring back a bit of harmony between the refugees vis-a-vis the military, right. Even though some of the complaints were directed towards organizations, so that the military could help out and work it out. We had, for instance, a lot of problems in a camp called in Bindermichel in Linz. If you recall, Linz is the place where the aluminum works were there. Now, I was sent in there, that's where I met Engineer Wiesenthal, the famous woman by the name of Gisela Weinfeld. I don't know if you've met her. She went to work in the Library of Congress. She may be found in Washington, D.C., a woman who speaks all Slavic languages fluently. Wonderful Jewish woman who worked in the Linz area. And the idea there was to work out something with the G5 section so that there would not be any friction. And at the same time, not to let things get out of hand to a point where Jewish people might take advantage of the fact that the Army took a lax stand towards them and not cause problems in other areas. Now, for instance, there were serious complaints in a camp by the name of Wegscheid near Wels, Austria. It was a camp that was absolutely below human standard of housing. We're talking 46, 47, going in up to 48.
But we're speaking now of the 46, 47 time, when a bad winter caused an awful lot of trouble. People lived there. It was a concentration camp or a labor camp of the Nazi era transformed into a DP camp. In other words, a concentration camp without wire. Same trouble. So that it was almost impossible for people to live in such a camp. And it was necessary to try and get the military to try and make some supplies available for repairs, where the people did their own help. Jews lived in Salzburg, and the big trouble started in 48, for instance, when Jews went out to get their own housing and actually bought prefab homes, and they called this New Palestine. This is absolutely a fantastic era all by itself.
Well,
the chaplain had to be the intermediary, because nobody could conceive of the fact that people, where did they get the money for all these houses? Well, the joint ostensibly financed it. I mean, this is still something which I can't answer you, who really financed it. But Jews actually built a community, a small model village.
Where was this and when?
In Salzburg around 48.
When in 48? Would you have an idea? Before the establishment of the State of Israel?
I believe so.
Why were these Jews building homes in
Now, they didn't build homes. I mean, this all took place at the same time of the establishment of the State of Israel. Why did they build homes? Because they lived in substandard housing. And it got to a point where they began feeling that they will only be able to do something if they can get homes that are proper to. These were homes that, as far as I was concerned, the military was concerned, were put there by joint.
Why weren't these people going to Israel instead
Why?
of going to...
Because many of them were waiting. For instance, many of them couldn't get out. They were trying to locate relatives. Others had records that had to be rectified with shluchim in order to show that there was certain validity to their desire. Others were waiting for immigration to the United States. And so while they were waiting, they had to live someplace. And so they had valid reason to be there. There were others that were sick or had somebody in the family sick and therefore had to wait another year till you get another X-ray picture in order to show, for instance, that, some spot on the lung didn't increase and that it was a permanent situation. But these were people. It was a transit camp. But there in New Palestine, the people were sort of, it became sort of the center for all other camps. In other words, it had a kosher butcher. It had a synagogue facility. It was the headquarters for various party meetings, because there were many Jews that lived in Steyr, way out in the hinterlands, and some of them lived in the British zone. So this was a central point for them to come together. It also was a shipping point, so the Jews going from this camp could get to Munich very easily. Jews went from Salzburg, the next stop afterwards, they went to Innsbruck, they went to Bregenz, and Bregenz already was in the French zone. And they also had a DP camp. So the DP camps were more or less, in many ways, interlocked from the standpoint that shluchim, JDC, and organizations would try to shift people around in order to fit into a pattern of, for instance, for rehabilitation, or for health, or for kosher, in other words, compatible groups together, so that they could resolve their problem. And of course, the critical, hardcore problem, two, those who were waiting for visas to other countries, and others, those who sort of lost their desire to go any place and simply survived by their wits in the area. So that these people gradually fell by the wayside, because those people who became local merchants, let's call them local merchants, soon became absorbed into the population. They found a place to live. They were in a center where they could go back. Some of them were people who felt that they have a business now that they could establish or work their way into. And some of these businesses were strictly businesses of clothing, various kinds of like one had a sweater factory in Italy that he knew from before the war, bringing in sweaters. It became a geschäft.
Right.
And then, of course, there was on the edge of this a hardcore group of actually a quasi-criminal element that had no regard for the Jewish problem, no regard for the religious besmirching. All they were interested is making a good dollar so they can resolve their problem money-wise. And this element continued when I went back to Europe the second time. When the Hungarian revolt took place, I was in charge of Operation Safe Haven. When the outpouring,
1956.
right, I was put in charge of that as a result of my experience earlier. I was assigned immediately to this operation, where I was a full-time assignment. Already here we had Jews that already settled down in Munich to a point where they were actually not acceptable to the rank and file even of the Kultusgemeinde.
Were there any other activities as far as your being advisor to Mark Clark that you feel that were very important to relate?
From a religious standpoint?
Well, not so much from a religious standpoint, but if we're trying to find out what the role of the American Jewish chaplain...
The American Jewish chaplain, another important element. In Vienna there was the Rothschild Spital, Rothschild Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
This was on the Gürtel, G-U-R-T-E-L. They have a ring in Vienna and the Gürtel,
sure.
the outer
Right,
ring.
right.
This was the absolute nerve center as far as we were concerned. Here we had the opportunity, DP section would walk in, even the Russian, I have some photographs sitting with the Russian general who came, Lebedyenko, and his advisor, Nidis, I believe, who was a Jewish major, Russian army. Here we had absolute liaison suddenly. We were able to talk about refugees. Every time there was any religious affair, we invited the Russians to come. They would come to these things. Where we discussed being kinder to Jews, let them go through with helping Jews in the Russian zone of Vienna. And I would go to these for several reasons. One is I could understand the Yiddish being spoken by the liaison officers of the Russian general. He would speak in Russian, and many times the liaison officer would speak to me in Yiddish rather than speak in English in order to be very careful as to interpret as to what the Russian had said. On the other hand, the Russian could be appealed to, that where certain things had to be done. For instance, besides the Seitenstätten Temple, which was the city synagogue in the Judengasse of Vienna, there was also the Große Schiffgasse. Now this is was the most famous synagogue in Vienna. It's in the Schiffgasse, and it's called the Schiffschule.
Where's the Schiffgasse?
The Schiffgasse, I believe, was in the second Bezirk. Now, this requires Rabalta Simcha. There was an old man who took care. He acted as the rabbi. There was the Altersheim, the Krankenhaus. Everything was there. This was the old leftover of Vienna from the medieval times. A lot of things were destroyed in that area, but it was in the Russian zone. The Russians allowed Jews to go out of that zone and to bring back things. After all, they had to cross checkpoints, and they were very lenient with Jews there. As a matter of fact, the commandant of that area, I was told, was a Jewish commandant. Just by coincidence.
Right.
But it helped us because we were able to translate for him what our needs were and to get some help for Jews. Now let's go back to Rothschild. So the Rothschild became...
When was the Rothschild?
45, 46, 47, 48, 49. This was the place where you got your shots and where they had the health center, the Dr. Volkin and Frau Katz, two very significant names in the health. This is where the health organizations would come to check on people. But this was also gave us a chance as chaplains to establish, for instance, a kosher kitchen. And the man my first mashgiach for the kosher kitchen lives here in Chicago right now. We were able to put in a kosher kitchen because up to that point, nobody spoke kashrus by itself. It was a matter of humanity, feeding people, 500, 800 calories, 1,000 calories. Speaking on the subject.
Of the Rothschild Hospital.
Rothschild Hospital was able to receive religious people. Some other people went to Frankgasse, the Bricha, for instance. The Shluchim were more in the Frankgasse. Banatan, Arthur,
Asher.
we only knew him as Arthur. His name was Arthur to us. I never called him by any other name.
You're talking about Asher Benatan.
Right.
Okay.
And he and a dedicated group of people, especially, I'm trying to remember one, he was later a consul to Turkey, because I met him in Turkey afterwards. I performed his wedding. He gave me a grand time in Turkey. I shall never forget him. Very dedicated young man who actually gave away his youth just to be able to save people. And you see, he's one, as we say, was Etzach. He knew I'm a rabbi. I have certain things I can do, certain things I can't do, and knew how to use me for proper things.
In the Bricha.
In the Bricha.
Oh,
So
that's another aspect.
if he had religious people, he would call up, Rabbi Lipshutz, I have some kosher people, what are you going to do? Or call the joint, make sure that, we get some kosher food. You see, food was actually such a scarce commodity, or such a desirable commodity, depending on how you wanted to use it, that you had to have inherent trust. It had great monetary value. So that there were men who were very resolute in doing things absolutely the right way and knew how to ask for favors that they were not only entitled to, but there was a mitzvah to help them out.
Right.
So I must earmark these kind of people. Well, at the Rothschild Hospital, they had a synagogue. They had arrangements for people who needed a mikveh. Even though the mikveh wasn't there, they had arrangements made up for them. They helped people in identification.
Identification of what?
To find relatives all over the walls. As you
Right.
write graffiti, the walls were covered, solid, in all languages. So-and-so was looking for so-and-so. So-and-so was here a certain date, please find. I recall that there were so many people there that the steps at one time were numbered so that each one, they were assigned certain steps to sit on so they could be there when they called them to know where to go find them, even the steps. The army threw in cots and everything it could find. They
At
had
whose
a-
request?
at the request of the joint. You have to give joint proper credit. And with the concurrence of the DP section and the chaplain. Because they would come, if joint requested, they would come and say, does joint need it? What's going on there? Example, I complained about Sneezkite. I said that the women don't have separations. Jewish families don't live this way. You can't treat Jews like you treat Yugoslavs or other camps where there was a certain VD incidents. This is also something we don't talk about. Other camps, there were VD incidents went very high in these camps where you didn't have sanitary conditions. So when you try to explain to them that Jews, we need curtains to hang, where are you going to get curtains? So the army gave blankets, but please protect the blanket. It was not uncommon later to find the blanket, the word U.S. Written on the outside of somebody's coat, because they took blankets and converted them into coats. When I brought the first bed sheets, I wish to indicate, the first bed sheets were given to me by the Army in 110th Station Hospital, and brought them down there. People touched them. They said, the question was, wie kann ich schlafen? Aber zal leilach. Ich darf doch a hemd. And so women made chemises out of them, and they made undergarments out of them, and they made shirts out of them. They couldn't imagine such beautiful white material. Where could they find? And they slept on this miserable cot. And didn't want to deprive themselves of at least making something should be clean. I mean, this, I think, strictly, it's a very Jewish, I say a very religious Jewish concept to them. Jews did things that were wrong also. We had a malamed, we gave him, so we paid him. What are you going to pay him in? So we paid him, we gave him a few bars of chocolate, gave him a little bit of candy, a little bit of chewing gum, and gave it to him. Teach the kids while you're around. He walks outside with his briefcase, gets arrested by the CID as being a black marketeer. We come, please, he's the teacher, he's the Hebrew teacher. They said, well, he's a black marketeer. How's this guy got half a dozen chocolate bars and some other PX stuff against? He said, we gave it to him. He said, Rabbi, chaplain, did you give him something? I gave him 2 chocolate bars too. They said, don't you realize he's going to go out? I said, I don't realize anything. All I know is he's a teacher. He wants to help Jewish people. What can I pay him in? If I pay him in money, I'm violating the law. I have no money to give him. What am I going to take dollars and get shillings? I gave him what he can use. To him, he needs a chocolate bar. But these were things that even the CID would say, look, we don't mind, but let it be with a limit. Don't overdo it. In other words, don't syndicate the whole thing.
Yeah.
If you do that, then it's out. One of the CID men, his name was Bernstein. Very well remembered by Jewish people. He had a heart. At the same time, he was vigilant in catching people who abused these things and went too far. Yet the same man who would chase all kind of people all week long and was a specialist because he could speak Yiddish very well and used to be in charge of getting a hold of Jewish black marketeers, would come to services Friday night and say, hello, Rabbi, how are you? You'll excuse me, I feel very badly that what I have to do, but you realize sometimes I can't talk to you because I have to keep faith with my allegiance. I want to go back to another thing. For instance, the Lubavitcher Rebbe came from Shanghai. He came with a group coming through Vienna. I don't recall, it was the winter of 47, I think he came through. It's hard to remember these, but he came through. So this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I met him at the train. So they had one talus for the whole group of people. Where were the talisim? The Russians took them away. They thought maybe they were smuggling things in talisim with the tefillin they didn't have. I brought down talisim that I'd gotten from the Weltagude from Moses in London. So we gave him a few talisim, volene, the smallest size volene talis that is acceptable to be used. A few siddurim that was printed by the Weltagude, an offset press type of siddur, paper cover, really the original paperback, you might say. We gave them these things. But they needed some food. What can you give him? So finally, I had an idea. I had some leftover matzah. So in the storeroom. So I brought him some matzah that the Jewish Welfare Board had sent to me. We kept the matzah. Sometimes somebody would walk in and need something. So at least the matzah could make hamotzion. I want to show you something of a human kindness. We said goodbye, fine and good. Years passed. Years passed. Once we had an incident at Fort Dix, where a man was brought into the army. He had a beard, and they ordered him to shave the beard off. He refused to shave the beard. This is already in the 50s, in 1950s. These are years later. So then they ordered the beard to be taken off. He refused, claiming as a Jew he wears a beard all the time. So unbeknown to any of us, I was at that time at Fort Slocum, but unbeknown to us, a sergeant forcibly had laid him down on the floor and shaved off his beard. So now the question to the man's rights were violated in doing this. I remember we had to go to Rabbonim. So before they did it, excuse me, I jumped ahead of myself. So when they ordered, the man refused. They put him in jail. In jail, he ate in the stockade. He ate, I understand, chocolate bars. So while he was there, we got the question from the army. How far can a man go to shave his beard? In other words, is it health only, or what about religious reasons? After all, we had a problem with the Sikhs, the Hindus. Sikhs, S-I-K-H. Yeah. And they take their hair and roll it up on top of their head, and it's all right. There weren't many problems, so why should we have a problem with the Jews? So the question is, may a man cut it, trim it a little bit to look neat, or must he leave it full? Different questions. So one group of rabbis went to one of the rabbis of New York, and I don't recall his name now, but he's the
Feinstein?
Rabbi Feinstein. Rabbi Feinstein. He went to Rabbi Feinstein. I said, let's go to see Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I got a staff car, drove up to Lubavitcher Rebbe's place, got out the car. They gave me a Jewish GI to go along with me. Came in. I gave my card to the shamus. We opened up he said, you got to wait for a while. I said, just give the card. So he opened the door and he walked in. A few minutes later, he came out with the card. He said, you'll have to wait. There are a lot of people here. Just then the door opens up. Out comes Lubavitcher Rebbe. Shalom Aleichem. Drags me into the office and said, sit down on my chair. I said, I can't do it. It's not right. Not protocol. No. He said, he says, sit down on my chair. I want them to see this is what we do to honor a man who honors somebody else. Forcibly maybe sit down in his chair just to show me that he wanted to give me a shtickle covet. So I'm just saying, who knows what one little piece of matzah that you give to a stranger going through on a train, traveling from Shanghai, that this piece of matzah would someday get you honor that no money in the world could buy. And this actually happened with him. Not only that, when I came here to Chicago the first time, I came to Rabbi Hecht Shul, and I was there for the second day Pesach, so he asked me would I please come up and speak, and the introduction was, because even though I don't invite any guest speakers in my own shul, I must give him the honor because he honored my Rebbe. So I just show you how far one little kezayis of matzah can do for a man. That's the payment that you call real schar. So going back now to the Rosh Hospital, people came. I'll give you another incident, for instance, why they trusted the Jewish chaplain. We were told through the CIC that a lot of Jews were coming in at the border, Czechoslovakian border, Hungarian border, Jews. 1947.
When?
40s, in the winter, early spring, end of the winter. Jews were starting to come. Winter slowed down a little bit, they were starting to come. Loads of them were coming. They would each day give you a sheet. That is, the DP section would know how many went in, how many went out, or how many anticipated to come in on the border. And this we would follow all the time because they kept track of these things. But then, as this went along through the summer months, we were alerted each day, and we'd watch this. First of all, we needed logistics, wanted to make sure, and we had to keep faith that we did keep proper track of input and output of people coming through. One day at the end of the summer, came near fall, the general started talking about what our program is now. He says, Rabbi, what do you think, what's going to come in? So I gave him an estimate what I thought. One day I put a 0. He looked at me and he said, now you're covering up something. I never heard of a day when a Jew wouldn't come across that border. It doesn't happen. I said, General, I suggest 0. Please, don't show my mark to anybody else. But I say on that day 0. And so he laughed. And the others knew that I'd written something down, didn't know what. This was put aside. The day after, when I put the 0, I got a call. He said, how the hell did you know there was going to be a 0? It was 0 that day. You know, the day was Yom Kippur. And not one Jew, that is officially, crossed the border on that day. So I told him, I knew it's a very simple thing. I calculated that Yom Kippur, even if a Jew went over the border, he's not going to officially register. He is not going to do it. That much pride he has. He couldn't get over the fact here's a man running for his life. You know, would his faith really live with him like that? And this was a fact. This single incident made Hickey feel, as he said, Rabbi, you come to my home whenever you need anything. Don't wait, don't look at my aides. Just come into the office, sit down, talk it over. Let's sit and talk. Let's sit and talk. Again, here was a man, you see. Now, another man was a Colonel Linden, Linden, who was in Salzburg.
What was his first name?
I don't remember his first name. He was a general, I understand, but later put into the role of colonel. Linden, his famous speech, I came there with Rabbi Silver, Eliezer Silver of Cincinnati. You've heard of Eliezer Silver, Oliver Shalom, and Rabbi Ephraim Epstein of Chicago, two Vadhatzola giants. And he gave them his famous speech. Like this, he was a hard man to do business with, but he used to walk around with a shillelagh. And he said to them, I feel like Moses. All my life as a Protestant, I felt, that I'm devoted and dedicated to my faith. But when I saw these people, I feel like Moses leading him into the promised land. So he said, what about the border? You need some help. Don't worry, he says. When I can give the command, there will be no borders. And it's true that whenever anything came up, Linden, if you called up Linden, he said, look, I need allow a certain amount of people to travel down to visit down in a camp somewhere. He knew very well they're going to a certain camp because at that point they're going to be met by other people. He never had trouble with Colonel Linden. All right, say, Colonel, I need TDY orders. I want to go down to Bad Gastein. That was a trouble spot area. Did that come up in your... Bad Gastein. Bad Gastein was the place where the Nazis used to go. It was a health resort.
Yeah, right. It still is.
Yes. But Bad Gastein is where the Mizrahi had a hotel, and other Jewish organizations had hotels. These were centers where they would congregate a certain amount of people, and then when they were ready, the shipments went illegally across the border. They would walk across borders from there. But only the finest, I say the finest, that you could, the association. And I do think that the unheralded story is a story of Christians who felt that the Jewish march to freedom was something that was more than just, a human migration. There was something holy about the cause. For instance, in a camp, Riedenberg, Camp Riedenberg, which is in the middle of Salzburg. In Camp Riedenberg, when the State of Israel was declared, I was in that DP camp on that day, and the American flag was taken down by a DP officer who absolutely, he abhorred being assigned to a DP section, especially to deal with Jewish people. He never lived near Jews, but on that day he proudly came into the camp, took down the American flag, and let them raise up the Jewish flag so they could proclaim the State of Israel. Just that one good deed by this man, changed his whole world of thinking about Jewish people, because he felt he was part of history suddenly. It was too exciting to him. He just couldn't imagine these desolate, shabby people dancing, and as wild as they were, and that he, a goy, was suddenly part of it. He did something towards that. As I say, there are more incidents that, it's difficult to try and remember, but these incidents weave themselves into a pattern of what I call, I'll just give you one other incident. There was a General Sullivan who later he was in Vienna, once came to me and he said, Rabbi, I have something for the Jewish people. I said, what do you got? What do you got? He was a colonel. What do you got, Colonel? He said, and I was only a captain. He said, I got a carload of food for him. I said, carload of food? Fantastic. Oh, terrific. I said, what kind of food is it? He said, one whole carload of good American chili. Boy, they'll love it. It was wintertime of 46. I said, chili? He said, go ahead. That's good stuff. Chili is a difficult thing to come by. So I went to the committee and I said to the committee, I got a load food for you. What do you got? I got chili. What's it does? I said, they never heard of it. I said, chili, double out of it. I said, with flesh? Yeah, with flesh. Not kosher. So one of them said, Zola Salenessen. We don't want it. Tell them we don't want it. It just goes because they felt it would be wrong even to take it because there would only be chesed that maybe they're using it for black market. What else are they going to do with non-kosher?